Hello, everybody. So I'm going to be talking today about this project on climate change adaptation, which was partly led by EAUC that's just come to a close. I'm just going to share my screen now. So this is where all the resources are hosted on the Sustainability Exchange, which I'll talk you through as we go through the talk. But just to give you a bit of background, so obviously adaptation considerations and action and being prepared for the short, medium and long-term effects of climate change is very important. In Scotland this summer, we have seen a lot of campuses damaged by extreme rainfall of all sorts of different types, from on roofs to groundwater, that kind of thing. And obviously we had Christmas or winter closures for snow before. So we all know that our estates are at risk, but climate change is also a risk multiplier. So it can disrupt really important events in your academic calendars. So things like recruitment events, graduations, exams. And at that point, those events are really important to making sure the success of your institution. So we don't want them to be disrupted. But it's not just local impacts of climate change that we need to consider. So there's also the impact on all your supply chains, the research that universities will be doing abroad, your international recruitment and that kind of thing. So EAUC had realised that sort of adaptation was a really important issue. We know that a lot of institutions have not really gone very far on the journey, and it was really important that they were supported to progress on this. However, we also know that climate change adaptation is usually seen as an estates or a sustainability issue, or often passed off to them. So the key people that deal with climate change and risk and resilience within institutions generally see climate change as something separate to their job. So Ian Patton from EAUC and Mark Webster from HEBCON, which is the Higher Education Business Continuity Network, had a discussion about how you could integrate climate change risks and adaptation processes into existing institutional business continuity or resilience processes to really try and use the language and structure that senior leaders and other colleagues would understand to get climate change up there on institutions' agenda. So EAUC and HEBCON set up a working group, and that consisted of EAUC and HEBCON and also interested sector members, and they're outlined here, and Neil Smith, that will be speaking later, is one of those members. We were also really lucky to receive sponsorship from AECOM in the form of in-kind support from their adaptation specialists, but also their design teams, which has been really helpful in helping us complete this project. So over a period of about 18 months, the working group have discussed what's required to support the sector to really take this forward, collated different resources that are out there, and also developed two distinct guides. And all of the resources are available on the Sustainability Exchange now. So this is the website, it's sustainabilityexchange.ac.uk/adaptation. And you'll see at the bottom, there's 23 different resources, and these are all the different resources, some case studies, some examples, and then the two guides that were compiled during this, this project. So the two key guides which were produced were one on making the case and taking action, and then a second one on using your existing organisational resilience framework to develop your climate change adaptation plan. So that just drills down really into that detail. So I'll quickly show you the first guide. There we go, and I'll just scroll to the top. So this is the first guide, so adapting universities and colleges to a changing climate. And I'll just quickly go through the key things that we outline within this guide so you know what you can find there and how it will be helpful to you. So the forward actually is from UMAL, I should have mentioned that earlier. So they're one of the key university and college insurer companies, and they really see climate change adaptation as something that's really important because they're aware that the premiums are going to go up, and people need to take action now to ensure that they are protected against climate change and not just by insurance. So within this guide, we have a climate readiness self-assessment. So that's a quick way for you to have a look and see how you're doing so far on climate change. It won't take you very far, but just a very quick self-assessment. And then we have section 1 is about the case for action. So we've introduced here an elevator pitch. So if you were in an elevator or you had an opportunity to talk to a senior leader for just a few minutes, how would you convince them that climate change adaptation needed focus within your institution? So we've given you an example there. And the idea is that that can be adapted to your own priorities within your institution, so put in your own language. We've introduced the climate projections. So these are the projections for different parts of the UK. But within the guide, we also talk about if you want more detailed ones for your region, then where you can find them as well. We talk about the key risks to the sector. So we've got the infrastructure and business continuity aspect, which is the one that most people think about. So the impacts on your estate, but also the impacts in terms of health, safety and well-being, on reputation and student recruitment, and also on the political landscape. And we talk about opportunities. There are some opportunities that will come through climate change, and it's about being prepared and ready to seize those opportunities. You've got that first mover advantage if you know that they're coming. So just a quick highlight there about that. And then we introduce some of the resources that are available to support adaptation. So you'll notice throughout that there's case studies. So these are examples from the sector. Some are just a photograph of something that's been installed, and other ones are a little bit more detailed, explaining what an institution has done to try and progress their adaptation journey. And then we've got this section on skills and knowledge requirements. So there are some detailed skills and institutional knowledge that's going to be required if you're going to properly act on climate change adaptation. So this outlines the key areas that you need skills and knowledge on, or that you might want to go and seek external support for if you don't think you've got them in-house. There's a series of useful tools, all sorts of different things, from the projections that I talked about to different toolkits and resources. So they're quite good to have a click through. They've all got links. And then we go on to the business impact assessment for universities and colleges. So this is the one that the second guide exists and unpacks in a little bit more detail. And that one goes through these 7 different areas, which would be the process that you would take if you were going to go and do a business impact assessment structure and really try and do the workshop. So do take a look at that and the other guide as well. We talk then about some adaptation approaches. So what might you do if you want to adapt to climate change? And there's all sorts of different types of adaptation approaches. People often think of just sort of the technical ones, so putting up flood barriers and that kind of thing. But there are a lot of other ones that are often a lot cheaper and might work a lot better with natural systems and that kind of thing. And that's another case study, and then just thanks at the end. The second guide, as I said, it goes through that process of how you would do a business impact analysis process within your institution that would align with the processes that people are used to. But it also talks about how you would, the different products and services that you need to consider when you were doing that, the different climate hazards that you might be facing that you need to consider aligned with those products and services. So for example, your residences and what are the different hazards that they're facing. It talks about how you might score the risks that your institution faces as a result of climate change. And it also outlines a template that you can use for the workshop to really help you get through that. So as I said before, all of these are available on the Sustainability Exchange. It's sustainabilityexchange/adaptation. And we have just received the second guide, so we'll be sending out a launch email next week to share them with the sector, so do look out for that. So I'll stop sharing this now, and I'll hand over to Neil from Bournemouth Uni to talk a little bit about what they've been doing for climate change adaptation.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so as Rebecca has outlined, we signed up to participate in developing the climate change adaptation guidance, and so I'm just going to talk through how it was from our perspective and what we've been up to since then. So, and this is Shona isn't here, but it's very much a double act. So Shona Nairn Smith, Business Support Officer, was an integral part of the team, and I'll explain a bit more about that as we go through. So next slide, please. So where did this all kick off for us from? So we, like many universities, have ISO 14001 Eco Campus, and we've had it in our objectives for some time to do a climate change adaptation risk assessment, and never quite got there. Then last summer, Sustainability Leadership Scorecard came along, which we gave a go at, and strangely enough, the bit about climate change adaptation we didn't do very well. I think we got 0, but I had aspirations, of course, to get to get to the end point. And at that point, of course, then along came this project, which was just perfect timing from our point of view, as it gave us a good shove to get us going. So we were helping sort of pull together the various strands of the project, and to sort of help along, we piloted an approach to the workshop, and the details that Rebecca has said is in the guide. So we targeted, as we've already said, estates and IT. So we were looking at infrastructure as being one of our key risks. And the workshop worked really well. So basically what we did is we said to the participants in the first half, think about some of the extreme weather impacts that have already hit the university, and just work your way through what the impacts actually were across the different elements of the business. And then the second half of it was kind of the forward look. So on the back of the kind of projections that we anticipate for climate change, what are the likely impacts on the business? And strangely enough, it was really good engagement. And the key thing is that it's all about the conversation that you have with your colleagues at that point is really the value that you get out of the workshop. So I definitely recommend it as a good way forward. And those of you who went to the EAUC conference the year before last may well have been on the receiving end of us trialing some of that as well, because it was very similar kind of way that we ran that workshop to the one we ran in-house last October. So on the back of that, we went away, Shona and myself, and really had a go at creating a risk assessment. Now, in the background, just to make you aware, there's been lots of changes at our university, not like a lot of organisations. New strategy coming into force, which and the whole risk process within the university was up for grabs, in that there was being reassessed. And that was really a great opportunity for us to kind of get our foot in the door and sort of make the case that climate change should be part of that corporate risk assessment process. And what you can see on the screen, that matrix is the one that the university uses for its corporate risks. And you'll have something that looks very similar to that tucked away somewhere that somebody looks after. So I recommend you go and find that. And we used that template to do the risk assessment. The reason why we did that is we wanted to make sure that what we did aligned with the business. Then over a couple of months, a bit of refinement, and we eventually got to talk to our university leadership team about this in June this year, and we ran a workshop with them. So we broke them into various groups, and we talked about the kind of what the key hazards were. Now, the key hazards are the usual things like heat and cold, but also wildfires is an issue down here. And we got them to think about their particular hazard. So we broke, each table had a particular hazard to look at under these topic headings. And these topic headings you'll see are linked to what comes in the guidance. So we really wanted to get them to think in a broader sense about the likely disruption to the business. And one of the really important things that we emphasised was that that often we as a business will be open, even though they're with a climate change extreme weather event, but Dorset is a particular, well, we have a particular transport issue in that we have extremely poor transport. It does not take a lot to disrupt the transport network in Dorset. So we might still be open for business, but frankly, people just can't get to us. So that brings its own challenges. So really we wanted to get them to think about that. But we also wanted to think about the disruption to education and research. And you can see some thoughts there we shared. So if we just flip back to the previous slide, sorry, Claire, to the one before yep, that one. So going back to where we are now, and then I'll flick on to the last slide. So really important that we got to the link up to the corporate risk register, which we've managed to do. So that's quarterly reviewed. So that's a really important outcome for us. We've also updated Eco Campus. So it's part and parcel of our the way that we operate at the university, and that's also really important. So it's kind of part of the business. And last but not least, we did the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard again this year, and surprise, we did very well. So very straightforward. Find your risk manager if you haven't already, and they'll lead you to the corporate risk register, which is really important that you align to that. Have a look at what's going on in the national regional context. So the example there is the Dorset Local Resilience Forum. There you can find them on the government website, a link to them. So they've already been busy in the background looking at the hazards for your region. So don't fight against that. Look for the ones that are in there. You'll find the climate ones are all significantly, certainly were for us. As I said, align to corporate risk management, getting good engagement with senior managers, make sure you align to existing processes and systems. And the 3 key questions which came out very strongly from Scotland are really pertinent and really are a good starting point in terms of that conversation with your senior managers. And I'll wrap up there. Thank you.
Super. So this is where I try and get the system to work. Right. So hopefully you can see the slides. So so we're going to talk about the different side of the coin, the mitigation of climate change through the actions that we're taking at Keele and the climate emergency that we declared in May, alongside a goal for carbon neutrality by 2030. Note there's a question mark after it. So we'll quickly sort of go through how we got to the point of declaring a climate emergency and sort of what that was built on, and then leading to sort of where our thinking is now. And we don't have the answers yet, so you're hearing very much sort of our work in progress on this. So declaring a climate emergency was very, very easy for us. I'm a big fan of the idea that things have their time. And we had a very important visitor coming in May this year. So David Attenborough was coming to open one of our laboratories. He was giving a big talk. There'd been sort of a ballot for tickets to a big thing for the university. And obviously this was sort of at a time where there was sort of nationally, internationally, a lot of discussion around climate emergencies, and already I think 2 universities had declared a climate emergency. So actually the idea of actually putting our cards on the table and saying this is important to us actually came from the very top. I think it was a conversation in the corridor with our Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice-Chancellor, and I basically had an email which said, "I've had this conversation, we need you to put a paper together that will go to council in 2 days' time for us to make this declaration." So it was really sort of quick, responsive stuff. Now, in my opinion, and I think we've done a lot on carbon management in the past, but actually our targets have just been those of the Climate Change Act. So the 2020 target, the 2050 target. And then we started to sort of talk as an institution, well, how do we respond to the Paris Agreement? How do we respond to the IPCC special report on what 1.5 degrees warming? So it was quite a step change actually to make the climate emergency sort of declaration, and to give the target of carbon neutrality by 2030. So it was actually announced to the university by the Vice-Chancellor as an introduction to the talk that David Attenborough gave, and there was a gasp in the audience, I think largely from people in the States who were so well yeah, we've now got to really think about how we do this. So then actually it's like, well what does being zero carbon actually mean? There are certifications. We're going to do this. We're going to do it properly, and in order to do it sort of properly, we probably missed a few steps actually, because we went straight to setting that target. Now actually, I I quite like that approach, because it's sort of like, that's where we want to get to, and it's seen a real sort of change and focus in attention, having actually publicly said, right, that's the target that we want to get to. I'm going to pass on to Hugh now, who can talk a bit sort of about the work that got us to the point where we thought, actually, we can make this declaration.
Yeah, so the Keele University are in a good position to kind of head towards the zero carbon target, although it's still daunting. This graph shows carbon reduction over the last 10 plus years. So the red line was taking us towards the 2020 target, which, even though the campus has grown, the state has grown over 30% over the last 10 years, the university have still managed to be on track to meet the 2020 target. We've kind of picked the low-hanging fruits, and a lot of the kind of quick wins have been implemented. There's been an annual carbon reduction program, and so it's become more challenging to take things forward. The green line, is showing the kind of curve towards meeting the 80% reduction by 2050, which was kind of the previous government targets, and then the dotted line is showing now the steep curve, the challenge ahead for Keele University and other universities ahead to meet this zero carbon target. Just to say, the graph was obviously for scope 1 and 2 only. So in terms of scope 1, gas emissions mainly, it is a challenging area because, unlike electricity, there isn't a viable alternative. There is something that Keele are leading on with the national grid, which Zoe will touch on in a second. But this just shows the challenge we've got to kind of eradicate carbon emissions from our gas network. So if we move on to the next, electricity. Big reductions here again, big challenge. There's a project, low carbon energy generation project, which will hopefully see large scale renewables on campus, which is going to take up to 50% possibly of the carbon footprint away from scope 2. So that's really good. But beyond that, we still don't know at this stage how we're going to get rid of the rest of the carbon from our scope.
Okay, so this is all sort of in the context of also some big sort of energy infrastructure projects that we've got on campus. And so the university is really sort of focused on sort of energy. So we have Europe's largest smart energy network demonstrator, which we can do as a campus university, a 600-acre site, 4,000 residents, including staff houses, our private utilities network. And it's largely around that sort of using smart energy to sort of balance supply and demand, which becomes really important, particularly looking at sort of large-scale renewables integration. So this has had £15 million external investment from the EU and the government, and actually a focus on supporting a shift to the low carbon economy, and a lot of focus on research and business engagement. But if we don't meet the carbon targets, which are an annual reduction of 4,096 tonnes of CO2 annually by 2021, then we start having to pay the EU lots of money back. No further comment on that. So the emissions reductions largely come through, as you mentioned, our low carbon energy generation project. So we've recently got planning permission for solar farm, 5.5 megawatts, 2 wind turbines, 1.9 megawatt in total, and a 1 megawatt battery. And that build will start next year, and we need to be producing, as I say, by 2021. Obviously, we'll end up supplying or producing a lot in summer when our demand is lowest. And one potential that we are investigating is using our surplus electricity generation to create hydrogen to blend into the natural gas supply. And we can do that based on some work that we've got going on at the moment. So HyDeploy is part of it is a national project the consortium. It's led by Cadent and Northern Gas Networks. We're a partner in it. And Keele is the first trial phase of the project, which will blend up to 20% hydrogen into the gas supply on part of the university's private gas network. So there's an awful lot of work that's gone on in terms of the regulatory requirements, HSE approval for this. And it's the first project in the UK to blend hydrogen into the gas network. And the idea around sort of using 20% is it doesn't require any change to the gas infrastructure. And so it is a trial at Keele, so it's as part of High Deploy, it's time limited, but we are looking to continue that on campus. And then I'll move on to Hugh to talk a bit about the next steps.
Yeah, so obviously we've got a lot of exciting projects underway for reducing energy on campus, looking at alternatives, the renewable sand and high deploy, as Zoe's just mentioned. But to achieve net zero emissions, we need to start looking at a framework that we can work against to target our, to start with identifying what's in scope, and then to put targets in place to reduce in those areas. So it's quite clear what scope 1 and 2 is. We're all familiar with this in the sector, lots of work similar to what we've done with our carbon management plan across the sector. But we're having a look at this again, looking at what assets to include. Do we include things like staff housing on campus that might be outside the scope currently? We've got kind of presence in off-campus facilities that we don't currently kind of report it under our scope. So, you know, trying to achieve net zero carbon, it's about doing the right thing. So we're not going to just cut off certain elements that are not in our scope and say we're not doing anything with that. So even if they're not strictly in our scope, we still want to have some influence over those areas. Scope 3, we are a little bit behind other universities who have got scope 3 carbon management plans. There's a lack of available management data for particular areas such as business travel, but this is something obviously we need to address going forward. And we need to have a discussion with senior management at the university about what's actually included in our zero carbon targets, because I think the focus at the moment has been on the energy consumption on campus, and actually there's all these different elements of scope 3 as well that we need to consider. So our philosophy, if you like, is to obviously have a target and account for all our carbon from scope 1, 2 and 3, and to put plans into place to reduce the carbon from that. But in particular areas like business travel that I've mentioned, inevitably you will still have some carbon that you need to offset. And again, we need to have the discussions internally whether this is something we are comfortable with, something we want to be doing further down the line. So we've started looking at different offsetting schemes and tried to gauge kind of different views and opinions on them, good or bad. So we've kind of learned that there's a variety of different standards out there, and looking to, you know, sign up to what would be the best standard with most credibility, really. So our next steps, we've got a sustainability steering group in a couple of weeks that's chaired by our Deputy Vice Chancellor, and we've actually called an extraordinary meeting, and we've invited in staff who are leads in different areas that we have identified for the scope and the work streams. So people like Director of IT, Head of Accommodation, those kind of people that can have an influence on the different areas. So we've got a draft of what we think should be included in the scope, and from that scope we then created different work streams. So like I say, take an obvious one, electricity is clearly in scope, and then within that we can break down different work streams like IT, electricity consumption in labs. So we're creating different work streams for all these different areas for key staff to lead on, and then to go away and start looking at the carbon footprint and setting targets and actions to go forward. So that's where we are at the moment. Still a lot of question marks, but hopefully we'll start working through those questions and get some answers together over the next few months.
That's us.